Welcome to What is Comics with Matt and Jamie. I'm Matt Sardo, and you are.
I'm Jamie Jones.
Last week's episode was a lot of fun. We had some, looks like we got some good views on it, some comments, and everything like that. This week, I kind of want to talk about process because I was I read the Wonder Woman issue 1 by Tom King, and there's a few 9 panel grids in it, and I was like, "Oh, this is a Tom King stylistic thing." And I took some backlash from the writer, from the artist, because he's like, "No, this is my style," and I just, I if I don't want the 9 panel grid, I'm not going to do it. And I was like, "Okay," but I look at Tom King's work, and he has a lot of 9 panel grids in his book. So I mean, like, I feel like it's more a Tom King thing than an artist thing. And so I wanted to talk to you about process. And since you and I have made comic books and you've made comic books with a lot of other creators, like, how does that work?
Yeah. I saw your tweet. I saw what you said. And I think I think you handled it very elegantly. Um, uh, man, I'm gonna hold my thoughts. I guess not really hold my thoughts. That's a Tom King decision, right? Like that 100% is guy writes in 9 panel grids. Sure, yeah. I guess inevitably falls to the artist to do the storytelling, but also at the same time, it is a collaborative medium. Like it doesn't work if you're doing it with another person. Who like who is actually in charge, and why do we have the separation of like art and writing? Like what how much of writing is actually done in the art, or how much of the storytelling is actually done in the art, and how much of the storytelling is actually done on the page that, hey, nobody actually sees, right? Like I have a writing comic books is an invisible job. It should not be shown,
Right.
right? Because it physically isn't shown unless it's dialogue. And oftentimes you can write a comic, a writer can write a 5 page sequence of a fight scene and there's no dialogue, and then the artist draws it. Who wrote that? Most of the time the artist is like going in and making sure the beats work, and punch goes here, kick goes here. The choreography is just as much as the storytelling as the, like, they fight, right? Like that's all you have to do in a fight scene as a writer. All you have to say is they fight, they punch each other.
Right. I know
um
Tom King has said this in, like, I've seen Tom King several panels and I've talked to him. It's like, yeah, I write Batman's fighting ninjas. And like,
yeah,
that's
which
what I hand.
I also think is a cop out, but um, so like I think this is one of the biggest problems I have in talking about comics, or the way people talk about comics, is it becomes very uh, combative between that writer artist debate becomes very combative, when in reality it's not. Um, but writers will be like, this my least favorite thing writers do, just period, um, is say, oh, it's like magic. Like I write something and then I send it to an artist and it just like magically appears in my inbox. No, that's just not how that works. The artist is going to spend much longer on it than you are as a writer. So stop perpetuating this idea that it's magic. There's work going into it. You're devaluing the artist when you do that. I will die on that hill. You devalue the artist when you say it magically appeared. But then artists often have it in they're on their high horse about, well, everything that you see on the page, I did. And it's like, well, like sometimes you need a focus point to to uh, to draw something, and that's also valid. I don't know. Especially superhero comics, it's a different ball game, right? Like it is a collaborative medium. At that point, you're working with several other people on making a product that's going to come out on a timely basis. it's hard to do a timely basis thing as one person.
And I'm
I
just
don't
thinking
know
of,
where that
yeah, and I'm
where
trying to
we
think
left
about
and where
like
we came.
where I know that like, so there's a script, you hand it off to the artist gives it back, and then like how much of a comic is developed off in like text messages or DMs and like or phone calls, like all that stuff.
Yeah, well, that also depends too. A lot of artists and writers don't communicate. They're communicating only through the editor,
Okay.
right? So that's another separate part of separation. Um, I mean, you look at a book through image, yeah, I can guarantee you that there's a text message thread. I
Right.
can guarantee you, like, when I have worked with other people doing creator own stuff, it's very much, hey, I have a question. Let me just pop over and like talk to the writer about it. But when you, I've done a book that has not been announced. I've done a project that hasn't been announced, where I have not spoken to the writer at all. Right, like it's going through editorial, and that's standard.
And so
Um,
how does that process work? Like you get the script and do you do thumbnails and then send it back and be like,
to
okay,
editorial,
to
yeah.
editorial, and then who gives you feedback? The editor
So
or the
editorial will send it to the writer, and then editorial will have feedback, and then a writer will go, "Oh yeah, this looks great," or often like I have actually no idea what the writer thinks about the book, right? Other than editorial going, "Yeah, the writer likes it," so like that's part of like the working process of this corporate comics that I don't think a lot of people talk about is you're not talking to the other creatives in the field. You're talking to the editorial.
and I know with DC, I think it's more than Marvel. I haven't really looked at a map and pinned out where all the artists are, but I feel like DC has a very big international pool of
Hmm.
South America and like
Yeah,
Mediterranean artists. So I mean, like,
because they train people differently in Brazil for whatever reason. Brazilian artists are insanely good. all of them. All of them are insanely good, and it's frustrating.
so there's also like that dynamic of like language barrier because I know with like
Sure.
the monkeys first monkeys fighting robots book I did, our artist was from Italy, so like I would send messages back and forth, and I was just like, sometimes it would just be like I'm frustrated, and I'm like, oh, we're just not talking in the same
Hmm.
language and stuff.
Right. Right.
Okay, so okay, eyes opened on corporate comics, so that like adds a whole new dynamic of like not talking to people, which also like blows my mind because it kind of brings me back to animated films where like everybody records their voice in a box and they don't ever see anybody else, and I'm like, how do you do
Yeah.
this?
And what's crazy is the shows that people love, the shows that have like these huge followings, Justice League, like the Justice League animated show,
Yeah,
they're all in the same room. Famously, all of those actors are feeding off of each other's lines. They're interacting with each other, and the shows that really uh, make that, like we get really excited about the interpersonal connections with actors or with characters is only doable. Like I don't understand. I don't understand how cartoons get made purely from like from an acting standpoint. What are you doing? That like, are you that good? Are you that good of an actor? I. It's amazing that you are. That's uh, yeah. Voice acting is unsung.
yeah, no, and of course I immediately take us off topic of comics. But so the collaborative effort, talk about, I know that like Stephanie Phillips is a big name now, but like you were making a hockey comic book with her like 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Like
that was like our first. That was both of our things. That was like our first things. Um, Steph is great. Steph has a. I mean, we can run down. I've worked with Vita Ayala. I've worked with Danny Lore. Stephanie Phillips, Frank Barberi, and each Ryan Farrer, each writer is very different. Nobody makes comics. This is one of the beauties and problems with comics is nobody makes comics the same way. No two people ever make. But this is why you see Brubaker and Phillips work together all the time, because they work together well, and they like working with each other. And they have a short. You eventually gather shorthand with a person. Steph writes full scripts. And they'll be very detailed. Steph also has a background in photography and visual art. So what she is putting in to a script is almost often visual. She's thinking visually. And I don't think most writers think visually. I think they think in terms of like, or I say most comic book writers, because it's action-based panels, right? You can have an action on a panel when you're writing. Batman comes into window. You don't need to describe the window because it will be drawn. Steph will often stage things very well and eloquently in her panel descriptions because she is thinking visually, because she has a background in a visual medium. V writes entirely. The entire script is detailed. But over the years of working with Vita, we have developed a shorthand where it's maybe just a sentence per panel, and I'm not bogged down with all this information, this extraneous information that I don't need to know. My least favorite thing in a script, which I've gotten before, and I was like, you got to rewrite the script for me, was when like reveals happen at the end of the script. Like you're writing a story. The artist is writing a story, or the writer's writing a story, passing it over to the artist, and there's like a mysterious figure in panel 1, and then at page 10, panel 5, that mysterious figure is revealed to be dun dun dun, like
right,
whoever, the villain, and you're like, man, I really wish I would have known who the mysterious figure was on panel 1, and just said the bad guy is shrouded, because then you can draw something correctly. Now you're making me. This is my biggest complaint with writers. Now you're making me go back and redraw a panel because I had to read the whole thing. Because often I'll start reading a script and I'll start doing thumbnails on the side of that page and just going as fast as possible, because you're working in a medium that is deadline based. The deadline based comic book medium does not reward a second read of the script. It rewards one read of the script and then going right into it, and then turning thumbnails in the next day. That's what it rewards. So that's one of my biggest pet peeves is just tell me who everything is. Tell me who the villain is. I don't need it to be a surprise for me. It is my job to make it surprising for the audience. It is not my job to be surprised. I don't care. I'm also telling this story. And often writers will write the artist a story, and I don't want that. It's not done. This is an ephemeral thing until it's printed. So back to working with writers. Every writer has their own way of writing. This is, I think, another problem with comics is there is no one way to make a comic book. You have multiple ways to make a story work, and at the end of the day, it all gets funneled into same product that is comic. And that's a good thing. That means you get a bunch of people doing different types of stories, but you also have no standard vernacular between writer to writer, between artist to artist, and that's so specifically evident if you've ever done any kind of interview with any kind of comics journalism twice. You can be asked the exact same question twice, and it's a very different way that question is worded, right? That's just, I think now, I used to have a big vendetta against that, but now I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to fix it. I've gotten older and wiser and, and more jaded.
I mean, this was a conversation that we had like a long time ago about like, hey, maybe we should create like an encyclopedia for comics, or like making comics, or like a way to discuss comics. And then you're like, Matt, don't reinvent the wheel, just use what we talk about with art, styles of art,
Yeah.
and going from there. And then I was like, okay, but like comics are more than art. So then I was like, okay, let me look at what they're talking about in graphic design. And so I was like, let me see if I can merge like some concepts of like, okay, this is what they talk about in graphic design. This is how they talk about like, you know, art. Like, okay, there's some crossover in that. And I'm trying to, there was a third one element as well that I was like, oh, this is part of it too. Um, and film, probably film,
Yeah,
like
it's tricky to talk about something that is a medium built around or an active reading experience, right? In film, the main difference between film and comics is uh, one is passive and one is active. Reading, the act of reading is an active act. If I put the book down, the story does not continue for me,
right.
right? If I walk out of the room to go to the bathroom during Oppenheimer, I miss part of Oppenheimer, right? That's just, it's a passive medium.
Right.
Film and television is passive. We now have the luxury of being able. This is why people nobody goes to the movie theater anymore, because we like the idea that we can pause a movie, and we don't miss anything. But it's passive. You can do other stuff while you're watching TV. You cannot do another thing if you're reading. You're looking. You have to do this. That's the beauty of it. You're also able to control how long it takes, how long you spend on a panel, right? You have that control. You are now actively participating in the story in a certain way.
Yeah, I've been trying to come up with the word to describe, like when I'm reading a comic book, there's some comic books where like I'm moving because there's action in the book, and it makes me almost feel like I'm moving with the action. And then there's some books where I'm like, the way the art is driven, it's very static, and I'm just like reading a book. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, I need to come up with that word that like, where there's some art.
Insanity is what it is.
Oh, really?
That's your word. No, that means like you are reading, for lack of a better experience word. You're reading handwriting, right? Like that's you get the same kind of emotional impact, I believe, uh, when you are actually reading handwritten letters. That conveys a different feeling. You can feel the emotion, the spirit. Man, now I'm going to get into like the spiritual aspect of the transfer of energy is there, right? When you are writing, you're putting your energy into the page, and you have handwriting, and that represents something, and you're now conveying your emotions into words, into letters, which are literally just like lines on page. And then that line might, if you're about to cry, have a tremble, because that's part of your experience going through your head into arm, into pen, down on page, right? That's a transfer of energy, physically. um, that is readable, that's noticeable from human experience. It's like why people like Monet, right? I never got Monet when I was reading it in like art books, because you look at a painting this big and you're like, oh, cool, yeah, like Monet did stuff with colors and stuff. And then when you see a Monet in person, you're like, oh, this is huge. This is it's just massive amounts of information and brushstrokes and emotion over days and days and days of work, right? Like there's a lot put into that, that becomes interesting. Comics do that on a much quicker, tighter level, especially comics that are written and drawn by one person. Uh, the best example I have with this is Essex County by Jeff Lemire. When I read that book for the first time, I went, "Oh, this is this is comics. This is what I want to do with comics." Um, it is still to this day my favorite comic.
Canada got a TV show of that, and we didn't.
I know.
I'm like, why can we not see this? Why can we have this? We have this internet thing. We have this technology. Yet, for some reason, Canada gets a version of it.
I want to point out that you said technology like John C. Reilly. And we have this technology, and I couldn't let it go. Anyway,
my kids have been begging me to dress up as Wreck-It Ralph for Halloween.
That's a good. Listen, I'll call your kids. I'll be like, hey, we're gonna get your dad to be Wreck-It Ralph. That'll be good. That's hilarious.
All right. So one question for me, because of your studio space, does the Snoopy house make an ice thing?
It's a cookie jar.
Okay. Because there used to be, back in the day, there was one that like made you an icy.
No, it's not a snow cone. That would be something that would be in my house, though. No, this is just a cookie jar.
Okay. Classic. All right. Another thing that I realized, and I don't know why more comics don't do this, is I read Birds of Prey, the most recent one. Yep. And from what I can tell from the comic book, is they drew the comic book, they lettered it, then they colored it. So the special effects all blended in with everything, and it like looked amazing.
Are you not sure that the lettering was done by the artist?
No,
I'm not sure it was like sound effects and stuff.
Yeah, the sound effects like had the same.
That might be done by the artist.
Okay.
Because it was Leo Romero, right? Like that's. I don't know who did it.
I gotta pull it
up. But it's hard to say. This is one of the weird things about talking about comics as a person who makes comics. It's hard to say definitively how something's made.
Because, right? Yeah, we definitely weren't there. We don't know how it was going on. But like, I and also like I look at things because they send me PDFs of stuff, and I think that's like a very poor version of a comic book to critique, because like once it's printed, you don't know how it's gonna like look, when the ink hits the ground and everything like that. But like with a PDF, you can really tell like, oh, this was layered this way and this was layered. You can feel the layers more.
Yeah. It might have, like, all of the sound effects and stuff may have been done by the artist and then colored by the colorist.
I feel like that needs to be like the standard, because I can definitely tell it. That takes me out.
You say this, but like all of I love Thor, the Walt Simonson Thor comics.
Is there any other?
John Workman did all of the lettering for that. And he does all the sound effects. And so that can happen and that can work, and it does work. For Quarter Killer, Ryan Ferrer did all the sound effects for that book, and he did like these great graffiti style sound effects. I may have like written talk when somebody gets hit by with a baton, but that's just my handwriting, right?
Right.
I love when the artist's hand is in the lettering, but honestly, for a lot of that takes a while. And sometimes we've been talking about just the speed of deadline comics. You, you don't have the time sometimes.
No, I
It's easy when you do like an explosion and it's like boom, but and you're making the boom the explosion. That's a fun thing. But often it's easier to just go, I'm drawing an explosion, and then somebody writes boom on top of it. I would also argue that that boom is not necessary. A lot of times I don't think sound effects are necessary. I love them. I love putting sound effects in my comics. I often don't think they're necessary.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Like Mike Perkins, he was talking with us, and I think he gave us like the deadline of what he has to draw in a certain amount of time to get a book
Mm-hmm.
out in a month or whatever, to get the month going and stuff like that. Because then it has to go, to the colorist, to the, editorial, back and forth, and then to the letterer, and like what has to get, I want to say it was. I think it was like for a 22 page, he has to write at least he has to draw at least like a page and a half a day
Mm-hmm.
to kind of stay on track and
Yeah.
stuff. And if you're not
Yeah.
drawing at least a page a day, you're definitely behind.
He's inking. He might have 5 weeks to
Yeah.
do a 20-page book because he's penciling and inking himself.
Yeah.
He also might have longer because he's Mike Perkins and people love him. I love him.
No,
There,
he's definitely
I'm
one
in love with Mike Perkins.
I mean, I think I'm in love with the British accent, but like that always. But Mike Perkins is a very nice gentleman, and I was really sad when he moved back to England and stuff. So, but hopefully I'll run into him at New York Comic Con and say hey.
We all moved. That's the thing. Perk is great. I was about to say was great. He still is great. I love Perk.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
he's one of the reasons I'm in comics.
Yeah, because I mean, like we said this a long time ago. Florida wasn't the best place for comic books. Like being creative in comic books and stuff like that.
No, not at all.
No, and you moving next to an art college is like just makes sense. Like it's just,
Mm-hmm.
I miss being next to a college. Like there's just a vibe with like being studious or whatever it is, or there's definitely a vibe being next to a college. So,
well, I'm around a bunch of lazy art students, so that's. I mean,
a bunch of beatniks.
I don't know how studious everyone is being. It's like, oh, let's go to the park and draw. That's gonna sound super negative. If you're in art school, that's probably what you're doing.
There's a fine art school by me, and so every once in a while, I'll just see like 20 people with their easels out by the waterfront and like just painting landscapes and stuff, and that's it's inspirational. I like that stuff. That stuff's cool.
I love that stuff. I mean, let me say something negative and immediately take it back, which is everything that I've ever said in my entire life. Yeah, I love being able to have a sketchbook out and be working at a coffee shop and it not be a big deal is the best. People don't approach you if you're working, if you're drawing. Whereas everywhere else I've ever lived, people would be like, "Oh, what are you drawing?" It's like, "Oh, stop! I am trying to work. You are now interrupting my work flow." Here, nobody cares. Nobody cares because everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone is also working.
And I haven't been there, but
it's a beautiful thing.
But Savannah is beautiful too, right?
Yeah.
So like it's nice to be in a beautiful place drawing.
Yeah. I mean, they've got beautiful people. I mean, that's why I moved here.
I'm beautiful. I need to move to a beautiful place.
I live in this beautiful city. I draw. Get to just like chill and hang out and be beautiful with beautiful people. um,
Oh man, that's awesome. That's awesome.
this is what making comics is actually about: finding people that you want to hang out with to make comics. This is where, and I think one of the reasons why, to bring it back to comics and to bring it back to collaboration and writing stuff, why
Hey, I'm the host.
people
That's my
find
job.
we're co-hosting, buddy. Step aside. You know what you signed up for when you asked me to do this. Finding people that you actually like to work with and collaborate with is such a huge part of this industry that I think is not talked about enough. Um, I often get asked, "How did you get this job?" And my response is, "I like I'm friends with this person." Vita Ayala is the editor for the Baboon, and people have asked me, "How did you get Vita to do this?" And I said, "Vita and I would just get on video calls, and I said, 'Hey, do you do you just want to be the editor?'" Vita's one of my closest friends, so that happens because we are friends. Um, you look at people who continuously work together, and that doesn't happen even in corporate comics. That doesn't happen unless the people who are working together like each other, because it's hard to make stuff. It's hard to make comics anyway. It's impossible to make comics with people that you do not get along with. Um, and that doesn't even mean like, oh, I really hate this guy. It could be like we just have we think creatively differently, and
Right.
those don't mesh. Um, I've got friends that I would love to work with because I love them, but I'm never going to work with them, right? Because we don't see eye to eye on certain creative fronts. So why would we work together? That only would strain our relationship as friends. Um, so it's really finding people that you like working with and also like making stuff with. It's hard to find a good collaboration. That's one of the reasons why I work alone, because I'm a loner daddy, a rebel. Um,
There's a few times where I'm like, I need to like hole up and like learn how to draw like 4 different panel styles so I can just create something because like I couldn't
yeah,
find somebody to like do it. You know?
yeah, and it's tricky. It's hard to be. It's also, and it's hard to do it alone too.
Right.
It's mind numbing at times. It's like I have to wake up every morning. I have to make myself wake up every morning. Nobody's around. I live alone. I don't have a roommate. So it's like I'm waking up. I'm going to go sit at my desk for several hours alone every day. That's that's my life, and draw and force myself to make something. Um, that's a weird life. It's a weird living style. So it's often easier when you have somebody be like, "Hey, are you drawing this page?" "Oh yeah, let me go and do that." Um, so like the collaborative effort is not, while not necessary, is good. Um, when I write my own stuff, I often will be writer Jamie for like a week and then be artist Jamie. I try to forget everything I wrote and then just read the script as an artist separate. I try to separate myself. Um,
Interesting. That's interesting.
I write Marvel method. Um, I'll like write a paragraph of what the book is, and then artist pass it over to artist Jamie. I will draw the book, and then I'll take a couple days off, and then I'll pass it back over to writer Jamie, and I'll write I'll write the dialogue. It is That's just how I've ended up working now for the last several years, and that's how I'm able to get books done. I was having a conversation. Michelle Fife put on Facebook or Twitter or something a few years ago. and asked, "How does everyone write? Does anyone actually do Marvel method anymore?" And I was like the one person who was like, "That's how I write." That's the old. I have so many Baboon books written that are not done because if I'm just writing a paragraph for what this idea of the story is that I can pass to the artist, I have up to book 10 written. It's just it's just not drawn. It's just not actually done.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Okay, so process, how we work with creators, the back and forth. I mean, I when you mentioned that like sound effects don't need to be in comic books, I feel like that's part of comics. It doesn't have to be I mean, I know there's some books that don't need it, but like I really want to debate you on that one of like
Let's go.
the boom. I mean, like because I'm trying to figure out what is more important. Is it like, and again, I'm not an artist, so I'm just going to roughly try to communicate this. Like, is the sound effect more important, or is it like the action lines of the movement of like the motorcycle jumping through the air? Like, what creates more of the stuff?
I think a lot of times, and this is a holdover from old, not even like early Silver Age comics, where there's over explaining what's going on in the panel. Right? You read an old Spider-Man book, and it's like, do I need to read everything that Stan Lee wrote in this time? Like, do I need to see? And Peter Parker uh, changes from his schoolboy clothes and dons the Spider-Man mask and goes and flies into the, shoots
Right.
from his web shooter. Like that chunk when I can see Steve Ditko putting the mask on and shooting a web and like, is the art enough? And I think often uh, writers, I don't know if you see it so much now, but you definitely saw it back in the 90s and earlier, where writers are kind of proving that they're doing something, and they'll put words uh, on top of images that don't need words. They're just, you're explaining something twice, right? If I can easily see Spider-Man is swinging, I don't need to have also written Spider-Man swings.
Yeah, but that's not a sound effect.
Right. Well, sure. But if there is an explosion and that explosion sound is kaboom, do you need a kaboom sound effect? Or is it sound? Is that also letters on top of is that words on top of image? I I I say this loving sound effects. I love drawing sound effects. I love putting sound effects all over the place. But often it's just uh, like it feels like a sticker put on top of something.
Right. No, and that's right. Definitely now with like in the digital age, I feel like I say this a lot that I feel like we're just slapping a sticker on top of things and it takes away from the comic book and you come out of the experience. But there are some people that do it well. And there are some I'm trying to look if I have anything
Well, I would never
on my
deny
wall.
James. I would never deny James Herron to do a sound effect, right? Like
Right.
that's, but he is also integrating this. I would never tell Jim Rugg to not put a sound effect in a comic. He's integrating sounds into the image, letters and image as one thing, right? Which is often that's what a comic book. It's what a comic book can only do,
Right.
right? Um, so what I maybe need to step back on is say it's often not necessary to have sound effects. I think we put sound effects in almost as a way to say I am now writing something or I am now doing part of my job, which is sound effect. In the script, it will be like sound effect, kaboom. Well, no, you just wrote there is an explosion.
Right.
Like, does the writer get to make that call that there's a sound effect there, or can
And I
the
guess
artist?
that goes back to process. I mean, like it's one of those things where like maybe the writer writes kaboom, but then like you submit the art and you're like, oh shit, I don't need this. Or
Right.
or you like
Often you
or
don't.
or you like see the kaboom and then like the explosion, the clouds kind of make kaboom the sound effect where it's where it's integrated into it where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, that's kind of really cool and stuff like that. Like I
Yeah, and that's
integrated sound effects, I feel like is a whole nother conversation, because like
yeah,
that's like an awesome skill set to have to where like that's you know
yeah. It's also a choice. Like, it's an artistic choice to be able to put an integrated sound effect into something.
right,
But you are, at the end of the day, putting words on top of image.
right.
And is that necessary? No. You don't need to put more words on top. If the image is conveying the information, uh, well, I don't think you need more. Sound effects look cool and are fun, but we don't have sound in comics. One of
No,
the things that,
but
like,
that's
in manga, that's so great is like they'll put like there will be sound effects for leaves falling on ground, hitting, and it's like that's what they're writing. That's what
right.
this symbol means. That's interesting because now you're taking this idea. We just don't have like we have whoosh, swoosh, bam, pow. Like, we have sound effects in American culture, in American comics, are like action
Right.
and smacks, and I think that's a pull from movies and kung fu movies where it's like
Yeah.
you know we're taking that, but in other cultures they have sounds being integrated into uh, an additive to a certain two panels, right? Like, if you have leaf falling on water, if I could just write leaf falling on water as my sound effect, ripple, and then like ripple, 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 right? Like, you can do that, and they do that in manga all the time. But we don't do that in America for whatever reason, because it is silly. Like, there is an element of silly. Also, we have our language is based around it's not pretty. It's not
No.
like the way that the our letters are formed are hard and bold. In Japan, at least, you can be like, you can curve things and make it look nice.
Okay, so I'm an imaginative person. Like, I'm the one who's afraid of the dark because there's something in there, and it's all my imagination that does it. So when I like read a comic book, like I put my imagination into the book as well. So I fill it, whether it's filling in the blanks of whether it's sound or making the sound effects, or like I was reading the Wonder Woman comic and like there's a scene in the bar where you're seeing it from the outside and there's blood splattered on the window, and then the next panel like the blood is like dripping down, and I was like, my brain can process that because I've seen enough films where I know what that sounds like and I know what that looks like. And so like those two panels become animated in my brain. When panels are done really well, my brain kind of animates it. And like I'm trying to think, there was another one where like Batman swooped in and like the papers were moving, and like I filled in the blank of the wrestling papers and stuff like that because like I have those experiences, and but the artist made the stuff move or from their artwork, and then I filled like they had to create movement somehow, and then I had to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
That's I'm trying to understand movement in comic books Because there's somewhere I'm like, I look at a panel, I'm like, I'm supposed to fill in the blank, but they're not giving me what I need for my brain to kind of like do that.
Okay. Well, first off, let's go back to sound effects for like 2 seconds.
Okay. Right.
You just said Batman swoops in and papers are rustling, and you said, in my head, now I can hear the papers rustling. I know what that sounds like. I can see it. You did not need to have rustle, 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 rustle
No,
on paper.
but I can't
right?
remember if the panel.
For the sound effect.
I can't remember if the panel had swoosh. You know,
Right.
and then
What I'm saying is, do you need swoosh? Is it necessary for swoosh? Because you're filling in. You know what a swoosh sounds like. You see him coming in.
I'm gonna have to pull up the comic book and see what they did.
Yeah,
I'll see.
I'm just saying. I don't think it's necessary to have swoosh.
Right.
Would I, as a cartoonist, put swoosh in? Yes.
Yes.
Is it necessary? No. That's where I often bounce off against sound effects. I love thought bubbles. I don't write thought bubbles in my comics, and I think I know. You know what? I did do it, and I was very proud of myself because I was able to put a thought bubble. But I love that. I love thought bubbles. Is it necessary? No. We have culturally said it's not necessary for thought bubbles since the 80s. But are they fun, and is it a part of comics? Yes. Okay. Panel movement, image movement. Like, are you specifically talking sequence to sequence paneling?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely sequence to sequence paneling. I'm trying to think of like what, but there are some pages where I feel like, you know, like I remember, like I said, with Batman. I'm sure Batman started up here in another panel, and then this panel kind of. So it's probably panel sequence that leads to the movement. Not looking. I don't think I look at one image and I'm like, oh shit, this is moving. I think it's the combination of like Batman flying through the moon, swooping down, and then hitting, you know, getting to the pavement level, and then the papers rustle and stuff like that. So I think it's panel sequence is what makes the overall movement, not just one page, one panel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's the difference between illustration and comics.
Yeah.
Right. In illustration, you only have that one image. In comics, you're working in sequence, so you can have a poorly drawn thing in the middle of two master illustrations, and it still works as a comic, right? So what exactly are you asking? I feel like you just said you answered
my
question.
question. It's the sequence that creates the movement, and then I guess when it's poorly sequenced, I don't feel the movement.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think humans innately understand storytelling.
Right.
And we innately get like you are interacting with a comic, right? This is an active medium, not a passive medium. So you have to physically go from one panel to the other panel. And you can skim it as fast as you want. You can go through everything. And your brain is going to link images to ideas or whatever. Do you think so you described a 3-panel sequence where it's like Batman up on a building, Batman swooping past the moon, Batman landing on in a room with papers flying. Do you think you need that second panel? Is that second panel necessary? Right, the swooshing through.
The last panel, or like
no, the second panel, the moon panel. Right, if it's Batman on building, Batman over moon, Batman on ground, do you need Batman over moon?
I mean,
do you need it from a storytelling perspective? Is it cool? Is it a good image? Sure. Is it necessary for it to convey the story?
Okay, so I guess the question goes, it isn't necessary to convey the story, but does it make me feel better? like as I'm reading the book? Like, is it one of those things where like, so it adds to the emotional involvement of the story where I'm like, Batman's jumping, holy shit, he's in the moon. And then I was like, boom, now he's over here. Like, it's like, if there isn't the
Yeah,
holy shit moment, I mean, it's like, oh, Batman's on a building, he's swooping. All right, like, I don't, that's it.
but if it was, I think you could make the argument that landing is a cooler movement than over the moon.
Right.
Right. So like maybe, and I often run into this problem all the time where I'll be sequencing out something and go, why do I have this panel? Is it just because I want to draw that? And sometimes that's a valid reasoning. But if I can take that out and I'm helping the sequence from going from 1 to 2 as opposed to 1, 2, 3, that panel can be taken out entirely. Put it somewhere else.
Right.
There's probably a better, like you can still get that exciting Batman over the moon panel just in that, because that then is illustration. If you're only doing illustration work in a panel, is that panel necessary? Like that unless there's a massive passage of or massive traversal, do you need to show Batman going from point A to point B? We have this problem, and this is going to be somewhat tangential. We have this problem in D&D and in gaming where it's like, well, they're at the base and they're trying to go to this dungeon. Now we have this entire wilderness where these characters have to travel from one end to the other end. All you want to do is go to the dungeon. Do you need this? Or can you just go to the dungeon? Right? You can say, and you walk today, you're in the dungeon, right? Boop. Is it necessary for this middle part?
I'm trying to, and that's where I'm
there's
trying
two
to
ways
like,
to play that.
Yeah, that's where I'm like getting into like my cinematographer mode where I'm like, okay, what will make it feel like the book, like Batman is really flying through the air better, or coming to, like, is it, he jumps and then like you get like a small panel of the boot, a close up of the boot with like wind and whatever, and then he comes in, like, what is the elements that like add to, I know
Well,
we're
you're
talking about
saying,
story, I know we're talking
right,
about like elements of going from point A
but
to point T of storytelling, but I'm like, what makes the page move more or gives a more dynamic feel to it?
that's a different like page layout. And maybe you are working on a 6-panel grid and you're like, well, panel 1 is Batman
Are the panels
on a
this way
building.
or are the panels this way?
Right. Well, then you like, let's just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go
Okay.
basic 6-panel grid. If you have Batman here, and then you have to work in that 6-panel grid, here's where Batman lands, right? Boom, boom, boom. And you're like, could I put Batman here? Yeah, but I'm losing the sequence. I'm
Right.
losing this kind of sequence. That then you've made an argument to, yeah, putting Batman over a moon so he's flying is a cool sequence. But storytelling wise, and often you can just like cheese that and go, Batman on a building, panel 1, Batman landing, panel 2, Batman
Right.
like doing something. The three-panel grid is just as effective. I think often we have now gotten into the point as and you said the word cinema, you said cinemagraphically or whatever. Oh gosh.
Yeah, cinematography, that word?
Yeah, so you said cinematography, and it's like, oh no, that's film, right? You have now added language that isn't. This is what is comics, right?
Right.
You've added language that is not comics. It's not cinematic because this is not cinema. It can't be. So don't put up a now passive. That panel is not necessary for the story, right? It's not additive to anything, to plot, to story. If it's not additive to anything, is it necessary in the comic? And your emotional well-being is not what I'm thinking about when I'm making
But
a
you're
comic book.
but no, but you're talking. But that's the thing is like, oh man, I'm trying to figure out
You
the
don't
words.
need, so the
I know we
best
don't.
way,
I know we don't
right,
need
right,
it.
right.
You don't need it, but it like the enjoyment of the comic book is completely different at that point in time.
Is it though? I don't think so. I disagree. I think you can draw if the drawings are well done. You're going to get the same appreciation of that comic if that panel of Batman over the moon was in it or not. Uh,
I don't.
I don't think you're gonna. I don't think you're gonna miss Batman over the moon. It's the same thing. I was having this conversation earlier this week and talking about the cinematics in comics uh, and the way that you lay out panels versus the way that like somebody will just film action. And this is off of the conversation we had last week, where Brian Michael Bendis will write, person
Right.
dips spoon in soup, soup comes up, eats soup down. Where that is a very David Lynch way to do that, right? David Lynch would be like, I like soup, so I want people to like and enjoy soup. So I'm going to show this man eating soup very slowly. And Edgar Wright would go, bowl, soup, boom, boom.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll
And
be
then the
done.
bowl, and then the soup is done. And it would
Right.
like do that.
Yeah.
That would be how he does it. Both show action of eating soup. Right? Which one's better? I don't know. I hate to say, I like Edgar Wright's version more. Have I also watched David Lynch makes quinoa, which is a 30-minute movie about David Lynch making quinoa? Yes. Edgar
But
Wright making quinoa would be 5 minutes.
but again, well, again, this is like, um, I mean, but this is what's awesome about like comics and cinema is that everybody can tell the same story from a different perspective, and that's why like you have different
Sure.
artists, that you're like, oh shit, this, like because I was thinking about like what would have like Todd McFarlane done in this like you know Batman thing, and I was like, he probably would have had like three up and down
Well, the
panels,
moon would have been
and
the
then
biggest thing for Todd
right, the
McFarlane.
moon would have been the biggest thing in the background,
Which
and like
and I'm going to say
yeah.
this right now, arguably the worst choice.
um,
because it is a storytelling medium. You're
right,
trying to tell a story. Cool image of Batman does not a story make. That is a pinup, and there is value in pinup, but that is not what a story is. Then you would look at like, uh, how would Dan Klaus do that? And it's like Dan Klaus would go, Batman lands.
yeah,
We don't. He's not on a building ever.
he doesn't even say they
Batman
would.
just walks into a room, and you could still do everything. You could get the swoosh, and like the cape would kind of like be up, and it would be kind of ill fitting, and it's Batman walking into a room, because that's what a person would do. Like there are two different ways of doing this. One is only story, and one is flash in the pan idea stuff, right? I think one does not have value storytelling wise. One does have value storytelling wise. And both images, I'm going to tell you right now, you could just draw it cool. Batman
Right.
swooping in and Batman walking in could be the exact same panel, could be the exact same thing, and it's going to be fine. It's going to be cool. But you don't need Batman over the moon, because just draw it cooler. Or Todd McFarlane drawing Batman landing in a pile of paper, it's going to look cool.
Right.
Guy draws cool.
Yeah.
Dan Klaus drawing Batman walking into a room and paper not flying, just like rustling away, rustling away from the wind off of his cape, also has that. I mean, that has a lot of value. It's a more naturalistic value, and maybe a little. It would land comedically, because guy in batsuit is ridiculous, right? That's what it would play up on. The mundane nature of it is ridiculous.
All right, so I think this is a good place for us to pause and end the episode, because I wanted to talk about, eventually get to how in the 90s everybody was picking up a comic book because of art, and now people are picking up because the writer, and like the flip-flop of that. And I'll save that conversation for next week, because I feel like I need to think about
I need to talk about that for an hour. I will talk about that for another hour.
Because I need to think about what you're talking about here. And because I mean, I was an Image kid, and McFarlane and Jim Lee and Capullo, and like all the artists that like over created stuff, I guess. Like tried to put a pin up in the books. And I want to go back and like flip through some pages and be like, okay, am I still feeling like movement, or am I the story working, or this or that? So like I need to like go on the inside and have a conversation with myself about.
Go read some Todd McFarlane Spider-Mans and come back to me and tell me I'm wrong. That's like,
like
that book looks so cool. They are hard to read.
Yeah. No, and I'm trying to think of like, because like Greg Capullo has I'm trying to think if I still have it right here. I don't think I have it here, but I want to go back and pick up the issue that I'm talking about, because Capullo drew, Batman jumping over the moon, and how it works and stuff. And I just want to see. I'm trying to figure out, like, I'm debating, because like comics are art and they're words, but I'm like trying to figure out like what's more important storytelling wise, or if it's like where they meet at the apex kind of thing.
What's most important about a comic book, and I guess this is where we can leave it, is the storytelling.
Right.
Everything else is unnecessary. Essex County, I would never say, is a well-drawn book. It's really rough. It's amazing, but it's rough. It's a roughly drawn book. Jeff Lemire gets to be a better artist now, because that book is so rough in just its execution. Does it have less value because it's rough looking compared to Bone, which is beautifully drawn? No. They have the same value, but it's not. But what both of those books put before anything else is pacing and storytelling, right? I think often we get into this debate about comics because this is like the 5% of people who read comic books and are reading superhero comics, like corporate comics, where you have the division of labor
Right.
at a certain point. The thing that we have is this combative nature between writer versus artist, who is doing more work, when in reality it's just a thing. And if you're working together making a single product, it will be better. It will be better because you're working together on making this thing. Why does Watchmen work so well? Because it's an artist and a writer with a similar vision. They are making this product, and they are making this product to the highest of their abilities. And that's why that book has, I think, persisted as much as it has, and as long as it will, is because you have two people going in and making something bigger than themselves. So the constant perpetuation of the who is doing more work, what is this medium? Is it a writing medium? Is it an art medium? Is only detrimental in the long run in conversations that we have journalistically, creatively, behind the scenes, editorially. Putting people in different camps when you're trying to just make one thing is never a good is never good. In stage, you will see people who are clearly like, here's the star of this show, and that person is like, when they are out acting everybody, and it's like it becomes performative. What is that necessary for? Is that beneficial to the show? If one person's like blah 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 blah, I am the lead actor and I am doing a thing. No, it's better when lead actor guy can take a seat and listen to the other actors on stage and make a performance that is bigger than themselves. Like you are working together to make something. And often comics, because we have this division of labor, we have this, and it's not even division of labor, it's actually labeling writer, artist. And most people don't know what a writer does, and most people don't know what the artist does. And then art can be separated into penciling, inking, coloring. It's like, well, who's actually doing what job? And I think the further division of job title is detrimental for it to be like when we talk about this is what this artist did, or this is what the writer did, because in reality you don't know, as a consumer, you don't know what whose idea it was to have Batman over the moon. Right. And that might be an artistic choice, and that might be a written choice, but why is the writer writing it other than it's just a cool image? And then why is the artist doing it other than it's just a cool image? There might be reasoning to why you would have that panel, but we as consumers can only look at the final page and go, they made this choice. Is that the right choice?
Yeah, like if Batman jumps through a full moon and then like the next page you see like a dude turn into a werewolf, like, there's
that has clear value.
Right.
That has clear storytelling value.
Yeah. So all right, this is where we're gonna end. I'm gonna think about comic books, and then next week we're gonna talk about artists and writers some more, because I think there needs to be a serious conversation about how we're just kind of like repeating the same things that we've been talking about since like the 80s and 90s.
And I'm going to tell you right now, since before then.
Right. So
we have been having the same conversation about comic books since the invention of comic books.
Hi, I'm Matt Sardo.
We're not going to fix it. I'm Jamie.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.